we are moving to economic approach. Now, in the course of this study, we'll be looking at positive economic approach, normative economic approach, inductive economic approach, and deductive economic approach. Now, for positive economic approach, this deals with such emphasis as what had happened, what is happening, and what will happen. So this is talking about the past, the present, and also the future. Solutions are provided to economic problems when they look at what had happened in the past to solve what is happening at present. An example is when there is so much money in the circulation, it will lead to inflation. Due to the experience they have had initially, it has helped them to identify problems and how to solve it. And the problem there is that inflation. What is the cause of inflation? Inflation there is as a result of too much money in the circulation. And that is the school of positive economic approach. For a normative economic approach, this is based on unphilosophical or subjective or moral foundation, and it is basically unscientific. It actually deals with what ought to or what should be or what should happen. Now, an example to give in this is that solving inflation or creating of more jobs should be the priority of the government. This normative is not value free, and it is unphilosophical as it is written on the board. Now we go to inductive and deductive economic approach. Next is inductive economic approach. This is a process of logical reasoning that obtain or discover general laws from particular facts or examples. This approach draws conclusion from a valid judgment. Before conclusion is reached with this approach, every factors are considered. All factors are considered. That is the reason why this approach draws conclusion from a valid judgment. Next is deductive economic approach. This is the approach that does not draw conclusion from every logical or probably every valid judgment, but from general principles to a particular case. That is, to deal with every case, it has to draw its own conclusion, not from general judgment, but from generalization. That is how generally acceptable that judgment is. And with this, we have come to the end of economic approach. Yes, now we'll be looking at another topic, consumer behavior. And on this topic, we'll be looking at utility. Now, what is utility? Utility is the ability of a given commodity to satisfy human wants. Utility is another word for satisfaction. That is, the other word used for utility is satisfaction. And therefore, utility can be defined as the total amount of satisfaction to be derived from the consumption of a given output. For a consumer to determine the amount of satisfaction it derives from a commodity consumed, it needs to measure. And these are some of the approaches to utility to measure the amount of satisfaction. The cardinal approach. Now there are two types anyway. We have cardinal approach and the ordinal approach. Now for the cardinal approach is of the view that utility is measured or quantified with a numerical value called utils. Alright? And this approach can better be explained under the law of diminishing marginal utility. The other approach is the one of ordinal. Ordinal was of the view that utility is rather or relatively measured by ranking the quantity of commodity consumed at every interval. So at every interval, you take up a particular commodity, you are counting, or are you able to count the amount of satisfaction derived from the consumption of that commodity. Now the highest level or the highest point where consumer derive the highest satisfaction is referred to be saturation point. Saturation point. Saturation point. Now at this point is where consumer derive the highest satisfaction. Any other amount of satisfaction derived at this level, more than this level, will lead to extra satisfaction. Now from here we'll go to types of utility. Now types of utility. There are three types of utility, which are time utility, place utility, and form utility. Time utility is the ability of a given commodity to satisfy human wants at a particular point in time. Some commodity, at the time when they are produced, they are useless, but they have to wait until they are needed. An example is an umbrella. An umbrella may be produced in a particular time when there is no rain, and it will be needed when there will be rain. The period or duration when they are produced to the time when they are needed is referred to as time utility. Secondly, you have place utility. Some commodities at the point where they are produced, they are not needed, and therefore have to be transported to another area where they will be needed, or probably mostly needed. An example is generator. Generator produced in China is not needed or might not be fully needed, but when they are brought to Nigeria, they are mostly needed. So the distance between the place where they are produced and the place where they are needed is referred to as place utility. The next one is form utility. Some commodities in their natural form are absolutely useless for human consumption and they have to be transformed. Some commodities are in the process or in their natural form are useless and therefore are to be transformed to something else which will be useful. An example is flour. Flour in its natural form is useless but have to be transformed to either to make cake, to make bread, and so on. That process is called form utility. Now we move to concept of utility. Now we'll be looking at concept of utility. Now for the concept of utility, we'll be looking at three concepts, which are total utility, average utility, and marginal utility. Total utility is the total amount of satisfaction derived from the consumption of a commodity. It should be noted that total utility has no special formula. It is basically on assumption. The next one is average utility. This is the satisfaction derived from a unit output. That is the consumption or satisfaction derived from the consumption of just a unit output. And to calculate average utility, the formula is total utility divided by quantity. The next one is marginal utility. Marginal utility is the addition to the total utility derived from the consumption of a given output. Now here, the word marginal means extra. So it talks about the total satisfaction, or probably the additional satisfaction to the total utility, which is as a result of an extra unit of output. To divide marginal utility, or to calculate marginal utility, you have the formula to be changes in in total utility divided by changes in quantity. Now we can solve mathematics to understand this. Now, marginal utility. Marginal utility is the addition to total utility resulting from the consumption of extra units of output. The word marginal means extra. So it talks about the extra unit of output. Addition to total utility resulting from the consumption of an extra unit of output. Marginal utility can be calculated using changes in total utility divided by changes in quantity. We'll solve questions to understand this concept more. Now, looking at this illustration, we have output 1 to 6, output 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And as I said earlier, that total utility is based on assumption. So we have total utility 1, at output 1, you have total utility 10, total satisfaction derived 10, 70, 90 at 3, 120 at 4, 150 at 5, and 180 at 6. Now we look for average utility and marginal utility. Don't forget that I said that to solve average utility, you say average utility equals total utility divided by quantity. Now to solve this, we have 10 divided by 1 is 10, 70 divided by 2 is 35, 115 divided by 3 gives us 38.3, 155 divided by 4 gives us 38.8, then 185 divided by 5 gives us 37, and 200 divided by 6 gives us 33.3. Now from here we'll now solve marginal utility. Don't forget that I said that marginal utility is solved, marginal utility equals to changes in total utility divided by changes in quantity. Here to solve this one, we say T total utility 2 minus total utility 1 divided by quantity 2 minus quantity 1. Now we can pick a value here, and don't forget that at the beginning of every marginal utility is always constant. Why? Because at the consumption of every commodity, it is assumed that there is no additional consumption. So we'll move to the next one. So here we have changes in, don't forget I said changes in total utility divided by changes in quantity. So you have here TU2 minus TU1. So you have 70 minus 10 divided by 2 minus 1, which will be 60 divided by 1, which will be 60. So here is 60. Next one is 115 minus 70. That give divided by 3 minus 2. 115 minus 70 will give us 35. Or probably 45 rather, excuse me. 45 over 1. So we have 45 here. The next one will be 155 minus 115 divided by 4 minus 3. We have 0, 40. So we have 40 over 1. That will be 40. So this place will be 40. Then the next one is 185 minus 155 divided by 5 minus 6. We have 30 over 1. So this one will be 30. Then the last one will be, that will be 200 minus 185 divided by 6 minus 5. That gives us 15. So this one is 15. Now we move to law of diminishing marginal utility. Now the law states that as more and more of a commodity is consumed, utility will increase until a point where it will start decreasing as a result of continuous consumption of that same product. This means that as a consumer continues to consume a particular commodity, its utility will increase up to a certain point called the point of saturation, and any attempt to consume the same product will lead to disutility. Any amount of satisfaction derived apart from the satisfaction derived maximum satisfaction is said to be dissatisfaction. This can be better explained on this table. As you can see, the utility increases from 10 to 200. Now if you go to marginal utility, you see that the additional satisfaction derived by this person started from 60. Then it now starts decreasing to 45, to 40, to 30, and to 15. Showing that as more and more the total utility increases from 70 to 115, to 155, to 185, utility was at its peak 60, then started decreasing to 45, to 40, to 30, and to 15. Now we move to utility maximization.